the long and short of it is that it's a very, very terrible and dark culture to work in, particularly because it's children's TV. And so where Wizkid is saying, like, I'm not an Afrobeats artist, don't box me in, and, you know, Beyonce saying I make country music too, at the core of what they're saying is that I just want you to accept this new version that I'm presenting to you. If you take any group of people who have an existing culture and they go somewhere else, they impress that culture upon wherever they go. And so places that were urban, and I hate that word, you know, urban. What is good, my people? Welcome back to It's That Deep, the podcast. I am your host. My name is Feyisara, and if you did not know, this is a podcast where everything, literally everything, is that deep. From pop culture to politics to news to religion, you name it, it's that deep over here. It really is. And so thank you so much for joining me for another episode. I hope you're all well. I hope you're enjoying this small sunshine that we're getting. Very heavy on small because it's the UK, so what can we expect? But summer is slowly creeping its way towards us, and I love summer, guys. Not only because I'm a summer baby, but it just picks up my mood. And, you know, we're trying to be outside this summer, so if you know me, yes, I want to go out. If you, Feyisara, do you want to go? Yeah, I do want to go out. So start preparing your events to bring me along. But I absolutely love summer. I hope you also enjoyed the previous episode. That was, like I said, a heavy one, but actually it's been really well received. So thank you so much for all of the love on that. On this week's episode, we are talking about the arts and entertainment industry. Beyonce has dropped the new artwork for her latest album. Wizkid was yapping away. What else? We're talking about the Dan Schneider documentary that was released this week, and also I'll be reviewing Red Pitch, which is in theatres now. So buckle up, get a cup of tea, get a glass of water. If you're on your commute, slap me on, why not? If you're in the gym, put me on. Well, I don't know, I don't care either. But let's get into the episode because I think it's going to be a good one. Okay, so for honourable pick number 1, we are talking about none other than our good sis Beyonce Knowles. I'm gonna put a disclaimer here, and I probably will get dragged for it, but that disclaimer is that I'm actually not a Beyonce fan. Okay, let me put it this way, like the last music of hers I probably listened to was like a Destiny's Child album. Like, I just, not that I'm not seeing it for her, but I do, and I've always maintained that I think she's a bit overhyped. Like, great talent, great performer, do you know what I mean? But I just feel like there's people do too much when it comes to Beyonce. But anyway, that's besides the point. This week, Beyonce released the artwork to her latest album, Cowboy Carter, which, if you know anything about Beyonce, she is making this pivot towards country music in the shape of this album. And actually, you know, like I said, I don't really take to her musically, but as a cultural icon, I think she's quite interesting. But if you sort of look at the, you know, previous years in Beyonce's life, she's sort of slowly been making this move towards this like cowgirl country aesthetic anyway. So even the Renaissance album, the artwork for that, she was on a horse and she was wearing a cowboy hat. And then post that album, she's really taken on quite a different look. She's, okay, again, also might get dragged, but she's sort of appears to be white passing in a lot of like her latest looks, and she's taken on this like cowboy feel. And so it showed up, and well, I guess that's in an attempt to like prepare everybody for this album, but it showed up on the album because the artwork for it, she's again on a horse, again wearing a cowboy hat and a cowboy outfit, and she's holding the American flag. Now, is Beyonce, so she's gonna get flack for pretty much whatever she does anyway. When she announced that she was going country, of course the racists were like, oh, country's not for you, even though there's like a hall of fame of like black country artists. But actually this time she got a lot of backlash from black people when she released this artwork, particularly because she was holding the American flag, and a lot of people were arguing like, this is Beyonce, this is our, you know, she's black, she black. She did, Black is King, that featured, Burna Boy and Wizkid. She did Beychella, at HBCU, historically black universities. She's done Lemonade, like all of this very black leaning style of music and content around the music, for her to then switch to do like country, when the South has historically obviously been, or had a very tense relationship with black people. And so she was getting a lot of fingers pointed at her about that. And Azealia Banks, Azealia Banks is gonna Azealia Banks. I'm gonna go on the record and say I like her. She's a bit crazy. There's a few screws loose upstairs, but I don't hate her. I'm not gonna lie. She articulates her points very well. So she went on a whole tirade about Beyonce and like, how can you be pro-black but you're doing country music and all this stuff. And whilst I hear that, I do hear it as a criticism, I also do think it's unfair. The reason I say it's unfair is because Beyonce is American as much as the next person. Like, she is a Houston-born Southerner through and through. And so the chances of her hearing country music as she grew up, as she matured, she would have heard that. Like, that would have been in her vicinity. And so for her fan base to basically point fingers at her and be like, no, we know you to do black stuff, so stick to the black stuff, is incredibly unfair. And actually what they're unconsciously doing is boxing her in and basically saying, we know you to do this, so stick to this, and stifling her ability as an artist to pivot and to explore new things and to explore new sounds. And I really do think there's something in here about, like, as consumers, but even also as like personal day-to-day relationships, our unwillingness as humans to accept the new versions of self that people might present to us. It's so funny because the same thing happened really recently with Wizkid, where he went on this whole social media tirade and he was talking about, I'm not Afro anything, don't call me an Afrobeats artist, this next album's not going to be Afrobeats, deal with it, da, 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 da. And I actually think it was quite disrespectful. However, I do get it. Like, I get that at the core of what he's saying is that if he turns around and does Bollywood music tomorrow, he would still hope that his people show up and his people accept that he's exploring a new sound. And I do genuinely think there's something in here about relationships. And I feel like a lot of the friction we see in relationships, whether on a small scale or a larger scale, a lot of that happens because you have an idea of me in your mind, but I've matured. My interests have changed. I want to explore something new. I want to explore a new version of myself. And so I present that new version to you. But because it doesn't match what you know of me, you're unable to reconcile the two, and then you reject that new version. And in you rejecting that new version, it causes tension and it causes that like awkwardness. And so where Wizkid is saying like, I'm not an Afrobeats artist, don't box me in. And, Beyonce is saying, I make country music too. At the core of what they're saying is that I just want you to accept this new version that I'm presenting to you. And I really do think we as humans have a habit of treating people according to how they presented 5 years ago or 10 years ago or however many years ago, even if it was last week. We really have a habit of holding people to what we knew of them and not what we currently know. And I don't think that it gives room for grace, or it doesn't even account for the changes that happen in people's lives. And actually what it does is it imprisons people and it boxes them in. And that's why we see people like Wizkid hit out and reject the labels that people are putting on them, because actually they're saying, I've got the freedom to be whatever I want and to explore whatever sound I want and to do whatever I want. And I would hope as consumers of my music that you would respond to whatever I put out. And so, do you know what? I don't listen to Beyonce's music. I absolutely do listen to Wizkid's music. And when I saw he was yappa, 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 I was like, oh, but you're like, we love Afrobeats Wizkid. But now I'm like, on a personal human level, I as a fan would never want to stifle you because of a perception of you that I have in my mind. And so I'm like, okay, let's listen to the album. Let's see where it goes. Let's see what he does with it. And If I don't like it, I don't like it. I'll keep it stepping, but I would never want to stifle a human because I've contained them in my mind. My perception of them in my mind is contained. And so if you're a Beyonce fan, listen to the album. Let's see what go on. Let's see what happens. I'm not going to listen to it because I don't listen to her. But yeah, I thought really interesting themes in everything that uncovered this week with the new Beyonce artwork. And we shall see what happens. But let's go on to honorable pick number 2. Okay, so like I said, we are in the world of arts and entertainment for this episode, and honorable pick number 2 is no different. It's just not as fun. So I recently, or this week, the Dan Schneider expose was released. It was actually released in the States, but I found somewhere to watch it here. And for those of you who don't know, basically Dan Schneider was like, or he still is, like a massive TV producer, but the primary work that he does is children's TV. So he's responsible for some of Nickelodeon's biggest hits, like Drake and Josh, what's it called? The Amanda Bynes Show. I still love that show. What else? All That, for like those who grew up in the 90s, and then later, like my generation of Nickelodeon was like iCarly, Victorious. What else was there? Sam and Cat. That was a rubbish show. But he's responsible for those hits. So he's a big TV producer in children's TV. But this documentary is a 4-part series, and it uncovers the harrowing culture of sexual abuse and paedophilia and just perversion that took place on his sets and on his TV shows. And like I always say, I'm very like, and I always encourage people to be very cautious with what they consume, just because like it's not that deep. You don't have to watch everything just because it's out there. I still haven't watched the TB Joshua documentary, and I will not be doing that. But this one, like I said, I was a bit of a Nickelodeon kid, a little bit, so I was intrigued to see what this was about. So I watched it, and it's a very hard watch, and I'm actually not going to repeat any of the stories that are recounted in the documentary because it's just that bad. It is just that bad. But the long and short of it is that there was a real culture of perversion, and not only was it not stopped, but it was encouraged, and they put a flame to it and like emboldened people to be perverse on sets. Like I'm talking hiring quite literal pedophiles to work on sets with children. I'm talking even sexual perversion aside, like there's a culture of like misogyny and having female staff writers having to share a salary and mistreating them and treating them in really inappropriate ways, almost to drive them off the job. Like the long and short of it is that it's a very, very terrible and dark culture to work in, particularly because it's children's TV. So I have some takeaways, some lessons from it. If you want to watch it, find a link, or you can DM me and I'll send you the link I watched on. But yeah, some takeaways, because this was really, really hard to watch. I think, honestly, the first question that came to my mind was like, do we need children's TV? Do we need it? Can we not give those children a book and, I don't know, some animations to play with? Or like, can we not go back to the days of like everybody just playing with each other? Like, even that, you can't even protect your children from that, to be honest. But is it necessary to have children make children's TV? Like, can we have children's TV made for children by adults, if that makes sense? Like, we don't need them to be, on a really practical level anyway, on sets for 14 plus hours, not being in school, not being around lots of other children, having to partake in this adult child dynamic way, in terms of employment, way earlier than they should, and way earlier than they're prepared to do so. That was my first thought. Like, give these children a book and leave it at that, because it's just not worth it. There's no way to guarantee the protection of children, you know, on these sets. There just is no way. And so that was my first thought. My second thought is really the need for us as people to be very discerning. And the reason I say that is because Dan Schneider's very, very similar to Bill Cosby in the sense that he used a lot of his art to disguise, but also really tell us in plain sight what he was doing. So I watched a documentary on Bill Cosby like maybe a year ago, and it really quite excellently details how a lot of his comedic skits and a lot of his bits and his gags and all of that stuff are windows into, or reflection, shall I say, of real life behavior that was happening. He had a particular skit, or I don't know what the comedic language is, but like he had a bit, let me just call it a bit, on one of his early shows, and his character that he would play would drop stuff into women's drinks, and that would be sort of like the butt of the joke. Come to find out 20 years later that actually that's exactly what he was doing with a lot of these women, dropping stuff in their drinks and then taking advantage of them. And Dan Schneider is really no different. He was showing us in plain sight a lot of what he was doing behind the scenes with children, but he was making it look playful and making it look fun and making it look innocent on the camera, on the screen. And it is just harrowing, but it really is a need. Like, it really struck in me a need to be discerning and to be like, yo, these people are telling us what they're doing in 4K and we're not getting it because what? I don't know. That was my second thought. My third thought, I had a lot of thoughts. My third thought is really how, and I don't think this is anything new, I'm not saying anything new, but like the idea that everything really does thrive in silence, darkness, isolation, whatever you want to call it. Because again, as much as there was a culture of sexual perversion on sets, there was also a culture of nobody's going to talk about this. Nobody's going to expose it. Nobody's going to say anything for fear of them losing out themselves. So there was even a case of like a young black child actor, and his mum was uncomfortable with some of the things she was seeing. And she, I mean, you know, black mums, they're gonna say it as they see it. And so she was sort of just articulating what she was seeing. She wasn't too sure, but she thought it was a safe space to express. And her son did not get a call back the next season of that show. Her son was fired. Similar to Drake Bell, Drake, who's obviously the star of Drake and Josh, his dad was very uncomfortable with one particular person on set who was always around. That person is now a convicted paedophile, by the way, but very concerned with that person's presence. He said something to like the execs, to the production team, and then it was turned back on him. Like, he literally verbatim, they were like, you know, he's gay, so are you homophobic? What are you trying to imply? You're being homophobic. And this is how things persist. Like, and I'm not just talking, you know, pedophilia, I'm not just talking like mistreatment of children, I'm talking like shame, sin, all these things persist in a state of silence and in a state where there is isolation. And it's not like the minute you expose something, my friend taught me this, the minute you expose something, it loses its power because it's exposed. But there was such a culture that they created on set that it was like, you're not going to speak about this. And I know you're not, because if you do, in the case of Dan Schneider, if you do, I will fire your child. And that's even more sinister, knowing that a lot of these children were responsible for their, like, the majority of their income for their families. These people trying to get their families out of the hood, you know. So that is, I was like, and it's hard, and we can't even really ask anybody. We can't expect everyone to speak up, and we can't expect everybody to expose, because people got to think about themselves. But I was like, bro, everything thrives in silence. When you don't open your mouth, when you don't shed light on something, when you don't talk, it just gives that thing, whatever it is, whether it's a scandal, whether it's sin, whether it's an emotion, it gives that thing room to multiply and to fester and to duplicate itself. And that is not healthy for anybody, because if you watch the documentary, you will see so many parents recounting the same thing, but none of them spoke up. Again, I'm not blaming anybody, but none of them spoke up. And that's why it could continue from the early 90s all the way through to like 2017. 2017. That is that's over 2 decades. That's over 2 decades of silence. And that empowers people to continue abusing and continue taking advantage of children. It's ridiculous. As you can tell, it's really had an impact on me, but absolutely ridiculous. My last thing that I will say on this, because I do want to move on to the main story because it's getting me angry, is something, again, when we're talking about like humans and what we expect of one another, I think something that I am actually learning for myself is that I'm not entitled to people's trauma. And I say that because Drake Bell, I mean, pretty much all of episode 3 is about him and what he endured and what he experienced. But you hear the accounts of the other child actors and they're only just now finding out that it's Drake Bell because he's only just now able to speak on it. A lot of people are like, Amanda Bynes, like, where was she in the documentary? Why didn't she speak up? And I do think we have to be cautious in feeling like we're entitled to people's trauma and entitled to hear or to have people recount their pain and their trauma towards us, because it's a very personal thing. It's a very literally traumatic thing. And I think in a day and age where we have so much access to people, again, whether that's celebrities and influencers or people that we just know, like on a day-to-day basis, we have so much access to them that we think we know them and we think we're entitled to all of their story. And yeah, social media has bred a real entitlement in us. And it's like, if Amanda Bynes doesn't want to speak about her trauma, which I'm sure she has a lot of it, then she doesn't want to speak about it. And we should not feel entitled to that. We should not feel as though we're owed that because she don't know you, you don't know her. You watched her on the TV screen for a couple of years. And I think for me, when I was watching it, it's like, okay, even with people that I know personally, I've got to check myself. I'm not entitled to anything from you. I'm not entitled for you to share anything with me. Should you share it with me? Absolutely. It's an honor. I'm flattered. But there is just an arrogance and an expectation sometimes that we have. It's like, you owe me this. And it's like, I don't owe you a damn thing, particularly when it comes to things that are as painful and as traumatic as this. And so actually my biggest takeaway was get off social media sometimes, because social media is training us to think we know everybody and therefore we are entitled to everybody and their pain and their trauma. And that is not the case. Okay, so for our main story this week, it actually is also a review, but it's not as bad vibes as the previous one. I want to talk about Red Pitch. So I'm recently getting into my theatre bag. I really was not a theatre person, but actually I feel like black theatre is in a really good place at the moment. Shifters is on, Red Pitch. I'm ready to break my silence on For All Black Boys, but I don't want to be a hater, so I'm just going to keep it to myself. But for the most part, I feel like black theatre is in a really good place and it's getting a good look in where sometimes TV doesn't. But I went to go and see Red Pitch last week. This is its second run and it's now in the West End. So if you don't know what Red Pitch is, it's a story about 3 young boys, black boys, and at the core of their friendship is football. So they meet every day on this pitch, this football pitch on their estate, and they call it Red Pitch. And their aim for each of them is to become professional footballers together. But we see that dream and we see their interactions against the backdrop of the estate they live on. And the estate they live on is currently going through this phase of regeneration and gentrification. And I loved it. I can't even lie. Like, besides the good chemistry between there was laughter, there was banter. Then it has Kida, William Sterling. If you watch Sex Education, Jackson Marchetti, you'll always be famous. What? Kida? my God, not only a brilliant actor, brilliant to look at too. But yeah, really, really, really good play. And so all of those things made it great. But I think what I loved the most about it was that it was tackling such a real life issue in such a fun and like introspective way. And I feel it all the more because it literally is my story. So I went to go and see it with my friend, but my sisters have all seen it in the first run. And I got home and I said to my older sister, like, this is our story. This is our literal story in terms of, not about football because I can't kick a ball to save my life, but in terms of the displacement of people because of gentrification. I was like, bro, this is our story to a T. I'm watching it play out live in the theatre. So gentrification, just, I guess to define it, is basically the process of okay, so it's defined as changing the character of an urban neighborhood through the introduction of more affluent residents into the area, and it results in the displacement of the current occupants. Really long-winded way of saying people with money come in, push out the poorer people, and the culture and the character of that neighborhood changes. That was a really succinct way of describing gentrification, but actually there's a whole process behind it. So, you know, rich people move in and, you know, they love it because it's urban and it's fresh and it's young, and, you know, they tell their friends about it. Oh my God, look, this place is amazing, great transport links. You know, they're all coming from like the shires, so Oxfordshire, Bedfordshire, Hertfordshire, and they're like, oh, this is so central to London, we love it. They move in and, you know, they've got needs, they've got things that have to be catered to. So then we start seeing the businesses in the area cater to these people as opposed to the people who are currently existing there. So where it was a barber shop that did Afro hair, now suddenly it's a vape shop or an art gallery. And, you know, these rich people have to eat. And so they've got money, so let's hike up the prices, of course, so they can pay for what they want to eat. But actually the people who are still living there that were there before can't afford that. And so slowly and slowly and slowly these people, you know, get priced out of the area that they first occupied, and it's just no longer affordable. And then you look back in like 5 years and nothing that was there for the community that was existing is there anymore. And so I know gentrification is a bit of a buzzword, and it is at the core of it about financial displacement and the inaffordability, is that a word? The inaffordability of the area for the people who were once there. But actually it's also a real cultural displacement, you know, where naturally if you take any group of people who have an existing culture and they go somewhere else, they impress that culture upon wherever they go. And so places that were urban, I hate that word, you know, urban, places that were urban and working class, now that environment replicates the culture of the shires, and it replicates how they lived their lives before moving in. And so on top of the financial element, what was an urban area or culture that was, or a community that was thriving because of other elements, is now culturally displaced because they've all gone somewhere just to find somewhere where they can afford. And I actually love that Red Pitch painted the working, like the issue as a working class issue as opposed to a black issue, because like I've said before, a lot of times black theatre or black TV shows paint things as black issues, and great stories to me are just great stories because they're great stories, not because they're black. Actually, if you think about a lot of the areas that have been hit by gentrification, particularly in London, because I'm not too familiar with like gentrification, although I know it's happening up north, a lot of those places, actually for the most part all of them, are working class environments. Newham, I mean, the largest population of people in Newham are Asian, so it's not a black issue. And I love that Red Pitch didn't make it a black issue. I also thought it was really interesting to see the differing opinions to gentrification play out, like amongst, so the three boys, obviously played by the three actors. We've got Omar, Bilal and Joey, and despite being friends, rocking with each other for years, growing up on the same estate, they all had really different responses to gentrification. So one was like, it is what it is. It happens, doesn't it? Another one was like, yes, this is amazing, regeneration, you know, my granddad's going to be able to get a lift and he's not going to have to climb stairs, and this is for us. And another was like, this isn't for us. This is not gonna work out in our favor in the end. And I just thought that diversity, I sound like the Tories, but that diversity of thought when it comes to gentrification and seeing how it can be perceived on all ends of the spectrum was so interesting, because like I said, I've lived it, where like my family and I literally were watching high rises, £1 million high rises being built, you know, before our eyes, and slowly people in our community are being moved away or being, you know, directed somewhere else, or they can't afford it, you know, or there's no school spaces. And so everyone, even within my family, had a different response to that. Some people were like, well, the area looks nicer, so what's the issue? Some were like, well, yeah, but my plantain is now £2 for one. Sorry. Some people are like, this is life, this is what happens. You know, there is such a varied response to gentrification and how it impacts people and families and communities. And even within people who share the same characteristics, there is still a variation of responses. And I just thought they just did it so beautifully. Like, they displayed that so beautifully, that there's not, the same way Black people are not a monolith, working class people are not a monolith, and victims of gentrification are not a monolith. And so the responses are also varied. In terms of what this means for us as a society, so to speak, or what it reveals, I think my main thing is like, can we really stop gentrification? Like, is that something that could happen? Because I know it's kind of different, but I almost put gentrification and like immigration in the same boat, in that it's a culture, or it's a people, and a people who represent a culture moving from one place to another. And the only thing is with immigration sometimes is that it doesn't have to displace others, whereas gentrification, that the result is that it always ends up displacing somebody. But I also feel like if the people who want to move have the means to do so, they will do so. And so is it something that we can really stop? And is it maybe just something we now have to roll with the punches on, particularly in a day and age where this economy, I mean, God knows what's going on with the economy, cost of living is up. Like, maybe this is pessimistic, but what can we really do about it? And how can we stop people who in their minds just have innocent intentions to just move somewhere? Can we villainize them? Is it fair to do so? But then they don't even know that they're bringing collateral damage onto a bunch of communities. I'm not sure what our response to gentrification should be, and I'm not sure if we even can control or contain it, so to speak. And so those are my thoughts. Very open-ended, but actually, again, the play ended very open-ended, and that's why I liked it. It was like there wasn't a resolution. It was like, well, this is the state of how things are. How you respond to it is your responsibility. And so, yeah, gentrification is very, very interesting. Having lived through it is a very interesting thing. But that marks the end of the episode. I got through it despite some of the horrific things that we did speak about. But I hope you enjoyed the episode. Let me know your thoughts on Beyonce and Wizkid and Dan Schneider and Red Pitch. If you're going to see Red Pitch, let me know. Please let me know. It's such a good show. Everybody should go and see it. Everybody should go see it. And shout out to The Rendition for putting me on. Like, they really plug a lot of really good Black theatre shows in London, in the UK actually. So shout out to The Rendition. I'll put their stuff below. But yes, 'tis the end of the episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I will be back next week. We're going for 52 episodes this year. Hold me to it. But yeah, I'll see you next week.